everyone, it's the panel. Welcome back, everyone. We were we were having so much fun until we were rudely interrupted by a federal election, but now that's behind us. It's good to see y'all.
Great
Good
to
to
be
be
here.
back.
Great to be back.
And it's particularly good to see Garry Keller, who we had to do without because he was off doing his duty to the Canadian people. How did the campaign go, Gary?
Well, obviously not as well as I had hoped because I'm here with you today doing this podcast. And Paul, I like to think that had I been successful, I would have still been able to have these conversations with you, but in a different context. No, but seriously, it was a great honor being a candidate. I was the last nominated candidate for the Conservative Party of Canada in the entire country.
Really?
I had a grand total of 12 hours between winning the nomination on the Saturday night and basically Mark Carney calling the election on Sunday morning to enjoy my victory and get ready for the election. And we gave it a heck of a run in the great riding of Nipissing-Temiskaming, which includes North Bay, which is sort of the major center, but New Liskeard, Cobalt, the northern parts of the riding, Earlton, Englehart, all the way down south to Powassan, east to Mattawa. It's a fairly large riding. And in 37 days, we came within 1,500 votes of winning and actually won on election day when the votes were counted. But like a number of Conservative candidates, we lost the advance poll and the special ballots, and that's where the difference was. At one point, the Globe and Mail helpfully had declared me elected and then had to retract that. But look, it was a great experience. Having worked on 30 plus campaigns in my life. It's one thing being on one side of the aisle. It's another thing when you're given your on the first day your campaign material and your face is on it. That's a little weird, I got to be honest. Or when you're in the grocery store and people are asking you for signs or committing to vote for you. And but overall, it was a great experience. I'm very proud of the effort that we ran. And like I say, we came within 1,500 votes. We got 45% of the vote. Liberals got 47% of the vote. So normally, as you know, in a Canadian election, you get 45% of the vote, you're home free. But this election was a bit different, and I'm not the only one who experienced that. A number of other people did as well, got 45, 46% of the vote and didn't win. So.
Well, we all had a blast following your adventures, and I think Allison was in your riding during the campaign and sent back photos of your
Yeah.
campaign signs and stuff like that.
Yep. I
It was a
posted
heck of a
friendly
ride.
signs.
Um, I think the question that's going to hang over all of our deliberations, as often as this panel meets, um, is when are we going to get a chance to vote again? To me, one of the sort of meta questions is how long is this minority government going to last? But in the meantime, Allison, by my calculation, we've had 202 days of Carney as prime minister, 157 since he won re-election, and we've now had 3 full weeks of action in Parliament. How do you think this government is doing?
Too soon to tell. I think what has become clear and what I've heard around Ottawa is that this is very much a government that is run with a prime minister who runs it like a CEO. And a lot of people are getting used to that. In some ways, it might be a good thing if you need to have really, disciplined state capacity to pull off all of the major projects and big plans that this government needs to get through. On the downside, I don't know what that's going to do for morale, and I don't know how much systems change the Hill can handle at the moment. I also think we're going to see, I don't think he's defined himself just yet because he has a series of tests to pass. Will he pass the November 4th budget? What's he going to greenlight in the major project spending? Will he manage to pass Danielle Smith's test yesterday, which said, if you can get a pipeline to BC through BC, then this will be the test of whether Canada's a viable country. So I think that there's a lot of things, and of course, and then there's the trade war as well. What is a win on that? I've seen the opposition needling Carney on it, but what is a win for the opposition? I mean, for one thing, it's a pretty hard situation with not a lot of control on the Canadian side. But what is a win? Is it getting our major industries through the tariff war successfully until we renegotiate CUSMA? Is it getting the tariffs off before the renegotiation? So a lot of things are going to start defining Carney, but I still think he has some major moves to make and decisions to make before you can really respond to it.
Marci, I'll put the same question to you. I might put a finer point on it. As a Liberal, what do you worry about when you watch this government?
I'll pull on a few of the threads that Allison started with. Yeah, the government is being run like a business. There's no two ways about that. I'm not actually sure that Mr. Carney is the CEO. I think he may be running the government as though he's the chairman of the board, and he has CEOs in Michael Sabia and Marc-André Blanchard. The business style is very clearly being felt, to your point, Allison, in terms of systems change, new ways of being. The deadlines that are being imposed on public servants are very real. The deadlines, even anecdotally, on ministers to attend cabinet on time are very real. And so there is a new feel to this place, and this is a new government, despite the fact that it is a big L Liberal government. This feels very little like the government that we've become accustomed to over the last decade. So quite a lot of change taking place already. What I would say is, and I've said this elsewhere, that I think the honeymoon is over for Mr. Carney and the government. And while I appreciate some people have pushed back on that point and said, well, he still enjoys healthy lead in the public opinion research. What worries me is, in fact, that this doesn't feel like a honeymoon. This does feel already like he is into the guts of governing, and that there are a lot of challenges already facing this government. Mr. Carney's own performance, A plus. I mean, to think that this is someone who was not a politician a year ago, but who communicates effectively, who clearly understands the imperatives at play, who is strategizing in a manner of speaking like he is playing advanced chess. I mean, he is 3 steps ahead in terms of where he is going, forecasting the travel, which I know has been maligned by the opposition. Let's be honest, is going to be critical to reestablishing trade partnerships East and West, as they have proclaimed as a key priority. So he himself feels like he is top of the game. What worries me as a Liberal is whether or not there are any clothes on this new emperor. Are there levers to pull that will actually effectively bring forward and deliver on the change that has been promised? The ambition has been set up here. The expectations are really high. And what worries me day in and day out as a Liberal, not the agenda, fully support the agenda, understand that this is both a moment of some restraint that needs to be exercised and also investment in critical pillars. That's what we're seeing shape up for the budget. What worries me is whether or not the system is seized to deliver on this mandate.
Garry, by this time in the Trudeau government, you were chief of staff to the official opposition leader, Rona Ambrose, and I remember you were pulling your hair out about how easy it was to dislike the Trudeau government. You took the then new prime minister's name in vain pretty often. What what do you make of the Carney government 5 or 6 months into their time?
Well, to be fair, I don't think I was the only one within the conservative, not just caucus, but movement in a similar position. But a couple of things. One, I think you have to look at both parliament and government, and you can look at them together, but you can also look at them separately. And I think both are a work in progress. I think Parliament, I think that is something to watch, how Mr. Carney manages his caucus, because he's still, to Marci's point, a new elected official, new prime minister. And there have been many elected officials in this country from all partisan stripes who have run into trouble because they haven't got the caucus management side right. Now, on the flip side, Parliament hasn't sat that often. It's only passed a couple of bills since then. That's not a knock. It's just it hasn't sat very much. So I think the judgment's still out on that. When it comes to the governing side, Mr. Carney, both in the election campaign and since then, has set expectations very, very high. You can certainly, I think, quibble with some of the statements he made during the election campaign about how he was going to deal with Donald Trump in the United States and the countervailing tariffs, and then subsequently the decision to withdraw those very quietly in a lot of cases. The elbows up mantra, I think a lot of people are saying, and I think a lot of people who voted for the Liberals thought that it would be elbows up 24/7, 365. And we have seen that that is not the case. That is an example of setting expectations very high. He set his expectations high on a number of other fronts too. And yes, I agree that to turn the ship of state, especially after the last year, and Marci can probably quibble with me on this, what the drift that we had seen under the previous government, and use the example of being on time for cabinet, and I mean, to me, that's a pretty low bar for cabinet ministers to try. If you're not able to get to cabinet on time and show up wearing a suit and tie, like. I think you've got bigger problems, which that is a retrospective on the previous government. But he is. I think liberals would say they're pretty satisfied what he's doing so far. I think some of the conservative critique has been fair on what you promised and what you've delivered. I think November 4th, the budget is a real lightning rod or potentially a dividing point between maybe a honeymoon period and maybe delivery. I think the other thing that Mr. Carney will have to watch and people around him will have to be cognizant about is the fact that on the economic issues, on the structural issues, he has a very clear direction of where he wants to go. But it's the other issues that can crop up and trip you up. A perfect case, there was a story that came out yesterday that in 2023, an immigrant to Canada who had been accused of having a relationship with his niece was admitted to Canada and was raised in the House of Commons of, what are you doing about this government to stop this type of immigration happening? And the response is, we're working very hard with our partners to pass, and this parliament needs to pass Bill C-8. I think those are the places where you can see this government trip up. Like the response should have been, this is ridiculous. I've ordered an immediate investigation to shut this kind of activity down. We take these things very seriously. And it's those issues that Mr. Carney may not feel strongest about or not have the strongest background in dealing with that are more likely to trip him up than some even the economic issues.
Allison, the knock that I hear against this government more and more often, I still don't think this is a unanimous view on these guys, but it's that Mark Carney's, it's nice that his lapels are thin and all that stuff, but basically he hasn't actually done anything yet. All he does is fly around a lot and open offices. That there is no new criminal justice legislation. There's no shovels in the ground on anything. Do you buy that criticism, and how much do you think it hurts him?
Yes and no. So I do buy that criticism in that from what I've seen, there is a lot of daylight between the Prime Minister's office and his ministerial departments and his departments.
Yeah.
From what I still see, a lot of departments and even ministers' offices are saying, we're waiting to see what PMO decides. We're waiting to see what the Prime Minister decides. When you're in that situation, you're an executive doing all of the work and all of the execution. That's not sustainable. And I think that just kind of drives home your point, Garry, before, is that you need to have a really strong bench to carry all of this stuff out. So I don't know that that is running smoothly yet. Otherwise, I would say, on things like Canada-US relations, he's doing what he can. He inherited a kind of a messy situation from Trudeau where we didn't have the best diplomacy with the United States. He's backtracking on that. They've made some mistakes early on the Canadian side, and we're correcting that. But you can't win against Donald Trump when Donald Trump is that unpredictable. So I think there are some things that, he's going to have to figure out how to get his team to deploy all of these big ideas. But there are some things that are just going to take time. It's still early.
Do I want to talk more about Carney? Do I not want to talk more about Carney? No, Marci, tell me about this guy, Pierre Poilievre, who gets up every day and says they're screwing everything up. Obviously, you don't agree, but to some extent, all the Conservatives have to do is hold their support through the next election, and any erosion in the Liberal vote could prove fatal. How do you think Poilievre's doing on that score?
So I think Mr. Poilievre is a very known commodity in the House of Commons and known quantity, and we're going to keep seeing the same Poilievre there as we've seen for the last 2 decades, and that's what he has to do in the Commons, and he's effective at it. And really, the only interesting part of that dynamic is, will Mr. Carney take the bait at some point? Will he get dragged in? Will his, as we discussed on this panel in the spring when we watched him preparing for the debates, would he succumb to that constant constant, punching in the face that Mr. Poilievre is going to continue to be effective at. That's fine. That's all Mr. Poilievre has to do in the House, and we know he's tried and tested. What's more interesting to me is the Pierre Poilievre that's been on display outside of the Commons. Inside of the Commons, that's one thing. Outside, listening to him on the airwaves of the CBC, I found myself gobsmacked on 2 occasions listening to him on their flagship Saturday morning program, The House, first from the campaign trail in Alberta, and then most recently as the sitting of Parliament was commencing earlier this month. And just this notion that Mr. Poilievre would change the channel, quite literally, open up to an interview on the CBC, fairly wide-ranging on both occasions. The first outing in the summer, he felt like somebody who had not been on the other end, receiving end of a microphone of an interview in some time, but by the second interview, sounded more sure-footed to me. So all of this by way of getting to my answer, which is Mr. Poilievre outside of the Commons, reaching out, taking a different tact with respect to media, perhaps attempting to broaden the tent to identify the issue sets that have wider shared interest among Canadians. Maybe that is happening, and maybe that's a bit of a showcase in advance of his leadership review in January, and will revert afterwards. I don't know, but this version of him, where he is more accessible, where he is actually answering questions, is on point, and yes, is hammering on the government's ability to deliver. See what I said before. Expectations management is one of the central tenets of politics. Mr. Poilievre will be able to exploit the fact regularly that Mr. Carney has set the bar extraordinarily high. And if he is prosecuting that case now more effectively outside of the Commons and to a wide audience, not just select analytics on the YouTube, but actually speaking to Canadians writ large, then he becomes much more of a force than he has been in recent weeks. He's got the microphone inside the House. Let's see how he uses the microphone outside over the coming months. But the Liberals cannot let their guard down. He is right there in the rearview mirror.
Garry, how do you think he's doing? And do you think that he's preoccupied with the next election, or that he still has to focus on the leadership review, where party members are going to get to vote on whether he should continue as leader in January?
Well, if I can go back to just something that Marci said about his approach and the sort of early approach versus later approach, I think, being elected as a member of the House of Commons makes a huge difference. It gives him the confidence, it gives him more of the pulpit to go out and make the case, both inside and outside of the Commons, which you didn't see very much of him before the by-election, for the successful by-election. And again, to the media strategy, I can speak to some of this firsthand because of my experience in the election campaign. I spoke to somebody after the campaign who was fairly senior in the war room, and they said, for a group of people who supposedly didn't care what CBC had to say about him during the election campaign, the campaign was sure worried about what every morning at 6:30 a.m. when they're doing the media scan about what was on the CBC. And the reality is that a great deal of voters, especially older voters, they're not listening to podcasts. They are still getting their media largely from legacy mainstream media, whether it's sometimes newspapers or online newspapers, or they're turning on CBC and it's on all day. And I think I will be pretty blunt that it was a huge error to leave that channel entirely open to the Liberals and the New Democrats, but especially the Liberals, because there are a lot of people at a certain age who put on that TV in the morning and leave it on all day. And you're leaving a huge amount of vacuum out there to be filled by other people if you're not filling it yourself. So in terms of approach, I think he has slightly shifted his approach. You're not seeing the same kind of rhymey, axe the tax kind of sloganeering that you saw both inside and outside the Commons. You're seeing a greater outreach to sort of mainstream media. And I don't think it stops when the leadership review comes around. Look, I think I don't like to predict these things, but there is nobody coming out of the woodwork currently to challenge Mr. Poilievre. There's no sign of people organizing against Mr. Poilievre in the delegate selection process, which is happening as we speak. You'd know if there were. You can't organize a national campaign in a political party to try to take somebody down without there being organization, dollars, etc., a campaign to do that. None of that is happening. And I do think that he's got to have one eye on that at all times to make sure he's safe after January the 31st. But I do think that it isn't going to be a complete revert back to the way doing things, saying that, we're going to go back completely to the way of doing things because we didn't win the election. I think the proof is in the pudding. And we do have work to do with certain voter groups. And again, speaking from experience, I'd knock on a door, and if a 65-year-old plus woman answered the door, I'd be like, here we go. And I would hear it directly. It would be like, I don't like your leader. I think he's mean. I think we have a problem, right? And I'm not the only candidate to have heard that on many occasions. So we can't afford to lose voters because they're turned off about not just our message, but how we say it. So I think Mr. Poilievre will continue to work on that. I think he recognizes that. I think the party recognizes it. The proof will be in how that is delivered, and especially after the January leadership review.
Okay. One last piece of the puzzle is the New Democratic Party. And Allison, looks like we've got a race. Looks like there's actually candidates showing up for the leadership of the party. What do you make of the NDP leadership race so far?
Early days, but what I make of it so far is that the party and the candidates are all working very hard to define what the party is. I think under Singh's leadership, it was quite superficial, and it could have been anything to anybody. My time working in the party was very, very different than under Layton than I would imagine working for Singh would have been. So there's a bit of a vacuum there. And so you're seeing people come forward and define it in many different ways. I think Heather McPherson, I would tend to agree with her that the tent got way too small and boutiquey for the NDP. If you actually want to win, if you actually want people to vote for you, it has to be actually beyond the union memberships and beyond your typical NDP enclaves. It has to speak to other people. So I did like hearing her say that, and I was tired of purity testing, not just with the NDP, but with the Liberals and the Conservatives in the last government. So time to move on beyond that. There are going to be people who fight back against that. I think Avi Lewis has toned down his rhetoric a little bit, which seems to give him a bit of a better positioning and a more broad landscape to speak with. I think the challenge for him will be that, as a Northern Ontario New Democrat, to me, he's a Toronto guy. He's going to have to deal with that whole Kensington Market elite thing. Tell me how do you relate to low income people? What's your plan? What's your plan for working people? What's your plan to speak to them without that sort of typical, typical language, typical positioning. So I think that he's going to have to cast the net and appeal to people in Alberta, appeal to people in Northern Ontario, and all of those different areas. And then I think the last one, Rob Ashton, I actually liked some of the simplicity of his message, just actually identifying as a worker and saying, this is tough, things are expensive. He's gonna have to flesh that out into a policy message, of course, but it does give some interesting fresh voices and perspectives early on in the race.
Okay, I think we'll stop there because we're going to watch these guys in action for a bit longer before the rest of us jump in with our analysis on the NDP race. But hey, let's not be strangers. Let's meet again soon. Thanks everyone for joining us this week.
Thank you.
Great to be back.
Thanks, Paul.
Nice to see everyone.